Chapter 1. Sometimes the sun burns more than your skin. Sometimes it can burn deep into your heart. Tyrone Kettlefish knew that. Nobody ever understood him. No one ever bothered to take the time to ask him how he was feeling. The only time his friends took any interest in him is when he had a bag of weed or money for a bottle of vodka. And it was only during those times that he could actually let loose the flood of emotions that were buried deep inside. He'd woken up a couple of times at the local police station where his cousin, Terry, worked as a police constable. Terry's harsh voice still rang in his ears from this morning as he was released. "You're going to be nothing but a drunk and a druggie, Tyrone. You better smarten up," Terry had said. Maybe he's right, thought Tyrone. Maybe that's all I'm ever going to be. Seriously, he thought. How many people make it out of this dumb reservation without ever having had a drink? Everyone does it. Even Terry drinks when he's not working. Heck, he even gives his drunk buddies rides around town during his weekend night shifts. And I bet he sneaks a shot here and there with them too. He doesn't know anything. The only people that don't drink around here are the Christians, and they're so boring. "Can I at least get a ride home?" asked Tyrone of his muscle-bound cousin. Sometimes he wished he was built like him. Maybe then he'd have a bit more respect. He wasn't scrawny, but he just wasn't intimidating like Terry was. "Sorry, dude," said Terry, "but we have a call that just came in that we have to get to right away. I gotta meet my shift partner there. I can call your mom for you to pick you up." "My mom?" Forget it. Tyrone knew that if he called his mom from the police station, there would be a lot of answering. And he just didn't want to put up with it right now. "Well, I'm sorry, but that's the best I can do for you, man," said Terry as he grabbed his radio and pushed Tyrone out the door. Terry jumped in the police cruiser and shouted out to Tyrone, "Stay out of trouble now, you hear? I don't want to have to put your sorry butt in a cell again next week." Tyrone stood and watched his cousin drive off, spinning the tires of the 4x4 SUV and kicking up stones and dust as he pulled out of the gravel driveway. "Jerk," thought Tyrone as he covered his face and mouth from the dust and began the long, hot walk home. His home was on the east end of the reservation, closer to the river that flowed past the community. The police station had been built in a newer part of the reservation. It was a subdivision, if you could call it that, but the walk from the police station to home would be almost an hour. It would be a long walk of shame, and the hangover didn't help none either. He looked like a raccoon. He'd woken up with a big black and blue shiner. He wasn't sure where he'd gotten it from. All he remembered was arguing with someone about the local chief's decision to hire a company from out of town to build 10 houses on the res. Why couldn't they have hired the local people to do it, he argued. But the guy he was arguing with couldn't have cared who got the jobs. Why should he? He was already employed. It was Tyrone who needed the work. But at 17 years old and labeled as a druggie and a drunk, who would hire him? He remembered taking a giant shot of vodka, hoping it would intimidate the guy a bit, and then maybe the guy would see things his way. The next few minutes were kind of fuzzy after that. In fact, he vaguely remembers swearing at the guy and telling him what he thought of his rather large and rounded body. And then, bam, he woke up in jail. The midday sun was bearing down on him now as he walked that long and dusty road home after a night in the sin bin. Terry's words stung him with every step, even more so than the tiny pebble that was in his shoe. He stopped to take off his shoe and tried hard to balance himself on his left foot. Just then, a truck roared by, hurtling rocks through the air that made him jump back, lose his balance, and fall into the dry ditch below. Several curse words ran through his mind at the thought of whoever it was that drove by. He didn't have to wait long to find out that it was Sammy, the older brother of his best friend Jonathan, or Jay as Tyrone called him. Sammy's cruel laughter at his misfortune made Tyrone even more upset. "What are you doing down there, you loser?" laughed Sammy. "Get your skinny little butt up here. I'll give you a ride home." As much as he wanted to, Tyrone couldn't refuse. The sun was too unbearable, and the walk was still another 30 minutes at least. With his hangover, he was getting dehydrated fast, and he didn't want anyone to see his blackened eye. Whoever had had the bright idea of putting the police station at the edge of the reservation must have been an idiot, thought Tyrone. He crawled up to the road, put his shoe back on, and made his way toward Sammy's truck. Sammy was the local ladies' man, or at least he thought so. It wasn't that Sammy Redfeather was a bad-looking guy or anything. It was just that he was the eldest son of White Rock First Nation's richest citizen, Mr. Daniel Redfeather. Sammy and Jonathan's father had built a small fortune with his construction engineering company. But times had been rough on the Redfeather family lately. Mr. Redfeather had been involved in a scandalous affair with a band counselor's wife, and it seemed that the contract bids he submitted suddenly were being lost, misplaced, or were just not eligible for submission to the band council to decide. Times were getting tough on the Redfeather family. Daniel had taken to drinking more often. His wife had taken a permanent vacation to Saskatoon and hadn't been back for over 6 months now. It was rumored she had been seen in the company of several different men. Some said she was working the streets to feed a drug habit. Anyway, it's none of my business, thought Tyrone. He enjoyed hanging with Jonathan and sometimes even enjoyed hanging with Sammy. Sammy wasn't that much older than he and Jonathan. He was only 2.5 years older. Sammy's problem was thinking that everyone liked being around him, especially the girls. Sadly, they liked his truck and his money more than anything else. It was obvious to everyone else except to Sammy. "So you tried to jump George last night?" laughed Sammy. Grainy images from last night's fight flashed through Tyrone's mind. It hadn't been much of a fight. George Yellowhouse, ex-amateur boxer and band counselor George Yellowhouse, had a pretty heavy hand. "Yeah, I guess so," replied Tyrone, rubbing the red and tender area around his eye. Already he could feel the shame and humiliation weighing down on his shoulders. He just wanted to curl up and die. This was going to be an embarrassing week. Half the res must have heard about it by now, he thought, as they approached his house up on the right. They pulled into the driveway of a small, dusty white home. The black, sun-dried roof contrasted with the white siding and dusty exterior. In the driveway were the strewn toys of his nephews, David and Joshua. They were both 4 years old. At least they were for a couple of weeks. The cutest things in the world. But when they were just babies, they were a handful. They weren't twins. His sister Tanisha had given birth to them only 11.5 months apart. She lived at home. 8 people, all living in the same small 4-bedroom house. Tyrone, his mom, his dad, Terrell, his older brother, Tanisha and the 2 boys. And there was Kukum. Kukum was his grandmother on his mom's side. It was a nightmare at times. Other times it was comforting. Today was not one of those comforting days. Today, Tyrone just wanted to find a quiet place to hide and be alone. Impossible on any day. "Thanks for the ride, bro," said Tyrone as he slithered sheepishly out of the truck. "No problem there, little GSP," jeered Sammy. "Are you and that snotty little bro of mine up for some gaming tonight?" "Nah, not tonight," shouted back Tyrone. "I'll give you and Jay a shout later." He had no intention of calling anyone. He was too sick and too embarrassed to talk to anyone today. He didn't want to face anyone for at least the rest of the day, especially his mom. A cloud of dust kicked up by Sammy's truck tires covered Tyrone as he walked toward the house. It was his second dust shower of the day. The large living room window had been covered with aluminum foil to keep out the summer heat. It was a cheap alternative to air conditioning. The hydro costs were already too high for anybody to afford. But the only people who could afford air conditioning were either working for the band council, a drug dealer, or a bootlegger. Everybody else had to find a way to make ends meet honestly. Tyrone hoped no one had heard the truck pull up and take off. "Uncle Tyrone!" came the excited shouts of his nephews David and Joshua as they rapidly rounded the back of the house into the settling dust of the driveway. "Wow, great," thought Tyrone. As much as he loved his nephews, Tyrone knew he was just too sick and too anxious to get into the house undetected to play with the boys at this point. "Shh," he whispered as he raised his finger to his mouth, hoping to keep the boys quiet. Their tiny feet kicked up small clouds of dirt as they ran to meet Tyrone. "You gotta be quiet, 'cause Uncle Tyrone is not feeling good." In all honesty, he just wanted to slip in the house unnoticed and not have to face or speak to anyone. But he may as well have been talking to the trees. The boys looked at Tyrone like a couple of bear cubs eyeing up a free dinner. Nothing was going to stop them from playtime with Uncle Tyrone. They both jumped at a leg and hung on, screaming, "Walk, Uncle Tyrone, walk!" This was turning out to be a rough day.